Trust is the currency of power. We give it to those who promise to serve us, protect our interests, and build a better future. But what happens when that sacred oath is broken? When the hands meant to build start to steal? Today, we dive into the shadows where ambition turns into crime, and public service becomes a mask for cold calculation. James Traficant was anything but a typical congressman. Representing a blue-collar district in Ohio, he built a career on being a loud, defiant, and often bizarre populist. With his cheap suits, unruly toupee, and famous catchphrase, "Beam me up," closing his speeches on the House floor, he was a political spectacle. His constituents saw him as a fighter, an authentic voice for the forgotten working class who was unafraid to challenge the Washington establishment. This carefully crafted image of a renegade crusader, however, was a smokescreen for a gritty, old-school corruption ring. He didn't just bend the rules, he shattered them with a sense of theatrical impunity. His crimes were a laundry list of racketeering, bribery, and tax evasion. He forced his own staff to kick back a portion of their salaries to him, demanded free labor and materials from local contractors for his farm in Ohio, and accepted bribes in exchange for political favors. It was a betrayal rooted in a deep-seated contempt for the very system he was a part of. The psychological driver seemed to be a potent mix of narcissism and a persecution complex. He truly believed he was a righteous warrior and that the laws simply didn't apply to him. During his 2002 trial, he chose to represent himself, turning the courtroom into another stage for his political theater. The act failed. He was convicted on 10 felony counts and sentenced to 7 years in prison, becoming one of the few members ever to be expelled from Congress. The verdict exposed his entire public persona as a lie. The man of the people was, in reality, a man who preyed on them. When a politician's entire brand is built on fighting the crooked system, what does it mean when he becomes the most crooked of all? Jesse Jackson Jr. carried the weight of a political dynasty on his shoulders. As the son of a revered civil rights leader and a congressman from Illinois, he was seen as a beacon of hope, a charismatic and articulate leader destined for higher office. His reputation was built on a foundation of social justice and public service, earning the trust of a community that saw him as their champion in Washington. But beneath this polished exterior, a shadow of profound personal and financial turmoil was growing. The pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle, coupled with what his lawyers would later describe as severe mental health struggles, created a perfect storm for a staggering breach of trust. The crime was not a complex scheme of bribes or extortion, but a slow, methodical siphoning of campaign funds for personal use, a betrayal that was both brazen and intimate. Over several years, he and his wife used approximately $750,000 of donor money to fuel a lavish lifestyle, purchasing items like a $43,000 Rolex watch, fur capes, and celebrity memorabilia. It was a cold, hard betrayal of every single person who had donated to his cause, believing they were funding a movement, not a shopping spree. The motive was a tragic cocktail of entitlement, desperation, and a deep psychological need to project an image of success, even as his world was crumbling. His guilty plea in 2013 was a moment of public humiliation, and the subsequent sentence of 2.5 years in prison marked the definitive end of a once promising career. The court heard how he used campaign funds as a personal piggy bank. This case wasn't about a flaw in the political system. It was about the profound moral failure of one man. How can the same hands that fight for justice for the many steal so callously from the very people they claim to represent? Chaka Fattah was a political institution in Philadelphia. For over 20 years, he served as a Democratic congressman, building a powerful reputation as a champion for education, housing, and urban renewal. He was a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee, directing vast sums of federal money, and his constituents saw him as an indispensable advocate, a man who brought resources and hope back to his community. This image of a dedicated public servant, however, was a carefully maintained illusion, behind which Fatah operated a sprawling criminal enterprise fueled by public funds and illegal loans. His betrayal was not a single act of greed, but a complex and arrogant web of corruption woven over many years. The crimes were numerous: racketeering, bribery, money laundering, and fraud. He disguised a $1 million illegal campaign loan by funneling it through nonprofits that were supposed to be helping the community. He misappropriated federal grant money intended for educational programs to pay back the loan. He took an $18,000 bribe from a lobbyist seeking an ambassadorship and used the money for his personal taxes. The prosecution described him as the master of the web of his own corruption. The motive appeared to be a deep-seated belief that public and nonprofit funds were his personal slush fund, tools to be used to maintain his power and prestige at any cost. In 2016, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The consequences were devastating, not only for the community organizations he defrauded, but for the thousands of constituents who had placed their faith in him for decades. His downfall left a void of leadership and a legacy of profound cynicism. How can a man who claims to be building up his community spend years secretly tearing it down from the inside? Kwame Kilpatrick, Detroit's hip-hop mayor, rose to power on a wave of youthful energy and promises of a city renaissance. He was charismatic, stylish, and connected with a younger generation, representing a break from the old guard of politics. He was a native son of Detroit, and the city placed its hopes and its trust in him to lead it out of decades of economic decline. But this trust was not just betrayed, it was systematically plundered in one of the most devastating municipal corruption cases in American history. Kilpatrick ran the mayor's office like a criminal enterprise, a scheme the prosecution dubbed the Kilpatrick Enterprise. He used the machinery of the city government to enrich himself and his associates through a pattern of extortion, bribery, and fraud. Contracts for city work were steered to friends in exchange for lavish kickbacks, including cash, private jet travel, and Super Bowl tickets. The betrayal was so profound because it was inflicted upon a city already on its knees, a city desperate for honest leadership. The motive was a toxic brew of pathological greed and a God complex, a belief that the city of Detroit was his personal fiefdom to be looted at will. The 2013 trial exposed the shocking depth of the corruption, with the judge stating that Kilpatrick's actions very much led to the city's bankruptcy. He was sentenced to a staggering 28 years in federal prison, a sentence meant to reflect the catastrophic damage he had inflicted. The consequences were immeasurable, accelerating Detroit's financial collapse and leaving a legacy of deep-seated distrust that poisons the city's politics to this day. What happens to a city's soul when its chosen savior becomes its chief predator? William Jefferson, a Harvard-educated lawyer and a long-serving Democratic congressman from Louisiana, projected an image of sophistication and intellect. He represented a district that included much of New Orleans and was seen as a powerful advocate for his community, rising to become a senior member of the influential Ways and Means Committee. He was a pillar of the political establishment, a man entrusted with crafting the nation's tax laws and shaping its economic policy. This image of stately authority, however, masked a desperate and almost comically clumsy greed. The investigation into his activities unveiled a web of international bribery schemes, but one detail seared itself into the public consciousness and became a symbol of political corruption. In a 2005 raid, FBI agents discovered $90,000 in cash, neatly wrapped in $100 bills, hidden inside various frozen food containers in the freezer of his Washington, D.C. home. This cold, hard cash was part of a bribe from an informant in a sting operation related to telecommunications deals in Africa. The crime was a stunning display of arrogance, a belief that he could operate a clandestine bribery ring right under the nose of the federal government. The motive was a simple, yet profound desire for wealth that overrode any sense of duty or shame. His trial was a spectacle, culminating in a 2009 conviction on 11 counts of corruption. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison, at the time the longest sentence ever handed down to a congressman for bribery. The image of the cash in the freezer became a powerful metaphor for the rot hiding beneath a polished surface, forever tainting his legacy and further eroding faith in the integrity of public officials. When a lawmaker's home becomes a hiding place for illicit cash, what hope is there for the laws they write? Rod Blagojevich, the once charismatic and perpetually camera-ready governor of Illinois, presented himself as a man of the people, a political outsider fighting a corrupt system. His populist rhetoric and carefully coiffed hair were iconic, painting a picture of a leader deeply connected to his constituents. But behind the public smile was a chasm of staggering arrogance and transactional cynicism. This disconnect became shatteringly clear when he was caught on federal wiretaps discussing the Senate seat vacated by President-elect Barack Obama. He didn't see it as a public trust to be filled. He saw it as a commodity to be sold, famously describing it as a fucking golden thing that he wouldn't give away for nothing. The crime was a shocking act of political bartering, an attempt to leverage a sacred public appointment for personal gain, whether through a high-paying job, cabinet position, or campaign funds. The psychological portrait that emerged was not of a master strategist, but of a man consumed by a narcissistic belief in his own impunity, a man who saw public office not as a duty, but as a personal empire. The trial laid bare this breathtaking hubris. In 2011, he was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison, a stunning fall from grace that left the state of Illinois reeling. The U.S. Attorney, Patrick Fitzgerald, stated the governor's actions would have made Lincoln roll over in his grave. The consequences were profound, deepening public cynicism and leaving a permanent stain on the state's political landscape. After his sentence was commuted in 2020, he remained defiant, a living symbol of ambition untethered from ethics. How can a man elected to fight corruption become its most audacious poster child? Michael Grimm, a former Marine and FBI agent, built his political career as a congressman from New York on a tough-on-crime, no-nonsense persona. His background gave him an aura of unimpeachable integrity. He was seen by his Staten Island constituents as a fighter, a man of honor who understood the law because he had enforced it. He held himself out as a paragon of ethics, a stark contrast to the corrupt politicians he decried. This entire persona, however, was built on a foundation of deceit. The crime that brought him down was not committed in the halls of Congress, but in his life before it, though its cover-up extended into his time in office. Before his election, Grimm owned a small health food restaurant, and during that time, he engaged in a deliberate campaign of tax fraud, hiding over $1 million in revenue and paying his employees off the books, in cash, to avoid payroll taxes. It was a calculated, grinding deception. The betrayal was one of profound hypocrisy. The man who championed law and order was, in fact, a common tax cheat. The psychological core of his crime was a belief that the rules for others did not apply to him, a sense of entitlement that directly contradicted his public image. When confronted by a reporter about the allegations, he famously threatened to break him in half, like a boy. This flash of anger revealed the pressure he was under as his carefully constructed facade began to crack. In 2015, he was sentenced to 8 months in prison, a swift and humiliating end to his political career. The case served as a stark lesson in hypocrisy. How can a man who once carried a badge and swore to uphold the law so thoroughly disrespect it for personal profit? Randy Duke. Cunningham was a celebrated war hero, a flying ace from the Vietnam War who parlayed his heroic reputation into a successful career as a Republican congressman from California. He sat on the powerful House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, a position that gave him immense control over the nation's military spending. The public saw a patriot, a man of integrity and courage, entrusted with safeguarding the nation's security and its treasury. But this hero's uniform concealed a soul consumed by an insatiable greed. His trust was not just violated, it was systematically sold to the highest bidder in one of the most brazen bribery scandals in congressional history. Cunningham created what was later revealed to be a literal bribe menu, a handwritten document on his congressional letterhead detailing how much in government contracts a company would receive for specific bribes paid to him. For $2.4 million in bribes, which came in the form of cash, yachts, antiques, and a Rolls-Royce, he steered hundreds of millions of dollars in defense contracts to his co-conspirators. The crime was a shocking betrayal of his oath and his country, turning a position of national security into a personal enrichment scheme. His motive was pure, unadulterated avarice. During his tearful confession in 2005, he admitted, "I have sinned. I have violated the law." He was sentenced to 8 years and 4 months in prison, a term that reflected the staggering scale of his corruption. The scandal revealed a dark underbelly of the military-industrial complex and left a deep wound on the public's trust in its decorated leaders. When a man celebrated as a national hero becomes a common thief in a patriot's clothing, who can we ever truly trust to guard the vault? Dennis Hastert reached the pinnacle of American political power. As Speaker of the House from 1999 to 2007, he was second in line to the presidency, a man viewed as a steady, unassuming, and pragmatic leader from the heartland of Illinois. His public persona was that of a former high school teacher and wrestling coach, a straightforward, trustworthy figure who brought a coach's sense of fair play to the often brutal world of Washington politics. This image of wholesome integrity concealed a secret of unimaginable darkness. The crime he was ultimately convicted of seemed, on the surface, to be a white-collar financial offense, structuring cash withdrawals from his bank accounts to avoid federal reporting requirements. But the reason for these withdrawals was the true crime, and it was monstrous. Hastert was paying hush money to conceal decades of sexual abuse he had committed against multiple students when he was a high school wrestling coach. The financial crime was merely the shadow cast by a far more profound and devastating betrayal. He weaponized his power and reputation, first as a coach to abuse boys who trusted him, and then as a politician to buy their silence. The motive was one of pure, desperate self-preservation, an attempt to use his wealth to entomb a history of predatory behavior. During his sentencing in 2016, the judge, looking past the financial charges, directly labeled him a serial child molester. He was sentenced to 15 months in prison. The revelation shattered his legacy and sent a shockwave of horror through the nation, forcing a re-examination of his entire career through a lens of profound evil. When the most powerful lawmaker in the land uses his resources to cover up unspeakable acts, what does that say about the secrets that power can hide? Edwin Edwards was a political titan in Louisiana, a state known for its flamboyant and often turbulent political culture. He was the quintessential charming rogue, a silver-tongued populist who dominated the governor's mansion for 4 terms. His appeal was legendary. He could disarm opponents with a witty remark and captivate crowds with his charismatic presence, once famously saying, "The only way I can lose this election is if I'm caught in bed with either a dead girl or a live boy." This bravado, however, masked a deep-seated culture of cronyism and corruption that he expertly navigated. The trust placed in him by his supporters was absolute, yet it was a trust he systematically monetized. His final downfall came not from a single act, but from a lifetime of blurring the lines between public service and personal enrichment. The The defining crime was a sprawling racketeering scheme orchestrated during the 1990s, centered on extorting applicants for lucrative riverboat casino licenses. It was a cold, calculated betrayal, using the immense power of his office to shake down business owners who needed his approval to operate. The motive was not just greed, but a profound sense of entitlement, a belief that the spoils of power were his by right. The trial in 2000 was a landmark event, finally cornering a man who had seemed untouchable for decades. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison, a term he began at the age of 73. The verdict sent shockwaves through Louisiana, signaling the end of an era. It was a stark reminder that even the most beloved and powerful figures are not above the law. But when a leader's personality is so entertaining and their corruption so open, where does public admiration end and complicity begin? These stories aren't a cause for despair, but a call to vigilance. They make us ask, what can we, as a society, do to prevent such betrayals in the future? How do we strengthen the institutions meant to shield us from corruption? We want to hear your thoughts. What changes do you think are needed to restore trust in those in power and the law enforcement tasked with holding them accountable? Which mechanisms of public oversight do you find most effective? Share your ideas in the comments below. Your voice matters because dialogue is the first step toward change. If this video made you think, please like and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on new investigations. Thanks for watching.